Sometimes the person everyone wants to leave is the very person who needs help the most. Snow hammered the windshield like handfuls of gravel thrown from the sky. The city bus crawled through downtown Buffalo at barely 15 miles per hour, its tires crunching through fresh snow that had already buried the sidewalks under nearly 8 inches of white. Inside, the heater rattled loudly, fighting a losing battle against the freezing January storm outside. Most passengers stared at their phones or looked out the fogged windows, counting the minutes until they could get home. Nobody noticed the woman standing alone at the next stop until the bus doors hissed open. Monica Brooks stepped aboard carefully, one hand gripping the rail and the other resting on her swollen stomach. She was 8 months pregnant, exhausted, and covered in tiny snowflakes that clung to her dark winter coat. Her cheeks were red from the cold. Her boots were wet. She looked like someone who had already had the longest day of her life. David Carter watched her through the large rearview mirror above his seat. 22 years driving city buses had taught him how to read people. This woman wasn't causing trouble. She wasn't drunk. She wasn't angry. She looked tired. Really tired. Monica swiped her transit card and quietly moved toward an empty seat near the middle of the bus. She had barely taken 2 steps when a sharp voice cut through the silence. "Excuse me." Several heads turned immediately. Karen Mitchell sat near the front wearing a white designer coat and holding a large shopping bag on her lap. Her eyes narrowed as she looked Monica up and down. "Can somebody explain why she's dripping snow all over the floor?" Monica froze. A few passengers glanced at her boots. Nobody said anything. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically. "Seriously? The whole bus is soaked now." Monica lowered her gaze. "I'm sorry." Her voice was soft. Almost too soft to hear. "I'm just trying to get to Mercy Hospital." Karen laughed under her breath. "Of course you are." A few nearby passengers exchanged uncomfortable looks. Monica slowly continued toward the empty seat. But Karen wasn't finished. "Actually, no." She leaned forward. "People like that always bring problems. Every single time." The words hung in the air. Nobody challenged her. Nobody defended Monica either. The bus continued forward through the storm. Monica sat quietly by the window, staring at the swirling snow outside. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach. David kept watching through the mirror. Something about the situation bothered him. Maybe it was the way Monica kept blinking back tears. Maybe it was the way everyone suddenly acted like she wasn't there. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The storm grew worse. Wind pushed against the side of the bus hard enough to make it sway slightly. Monica shifted in her seat and pressed a hand against her lower back. She looked uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Karen noticed. "Oh great," she muttered loudly. "Please don't tell me she's going into labor on this bus." A nervous laugh came from somewhere near the rear. Another passenger shook his head. "Not in weather like this." Karen stood up suddenly. "Driver." Her voice carried to the front. "You need to do something." David looked up into the mirror. "Do something about what?" Karen crossed her arms. "About her." The entire bus fell silent. Outside, snow continued falling harder than ever. Inside, every eye slowly turned toward Monica Brooks. And what happened next would stop the entire bus in its tracks. David tightened his grip on the steering wheel as dozens of eyes shifted between him and Monica. The heater rattled overhead. Snow streaked across the windows. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then Karen broke the silence. "Well," she demanded. "You heard me." David kept his voice calm. "I heard you." Karen threw up her hands. "Then do something. She is making everyone uncomfortable." Monica stared at the floor. Her face flushed with embarrassment. "I am sorry," she said quietly. "I am not bothering anyone." "Not bothering anyone." Karen laughed. "The entire bus is worried about what might happen if you have some kind of emergency." A man near the front nodded uncertainly. "It is pretty bad weather out there." Another passenger shifted in his seat. "Maybe she should wait somewhere safer." Monica looked up. Mercy Hospital is only a few stops away. Her voice trembled slightly. "I have an appointment." Karen crossed her arms. "That is not our problem." Several passengers looked away. Others stared through the windows, pretending not to hear. David noticed every reaction in the mirror. 22 years driving buses had taught him something important. Most people were not cruel. They were simply afraid to stand against the loudest voice in the room. Monica carefully adjusted her coat around her stomach. She looked exhausted. Snow still melted from the edges of her boots onto the rubber floor below. Karen pointed toward the front door. You need to let her off. The words hit the bus like a cold gust of wind. A teenager near the rear gasped softly. An older man frowned. Nobody expected Karen to say it out loud. Monica blinked. For a moment, she looked like she had misheard. Excuse me. Karen shrugged. There is a pharmacy on the next corner. There are businesses everywhere. She can figure something out. Monica swallowed hard. It is 20 degrees outside. Karen rolled her eyes. Then maybe she should have planned better. The bus grew even quieter. David felt something twist in his chest. Monica lowered her gaze again. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded appointment card. Her fingers shook slightly from the cold. My doctor asked me to come in today. She spoke carefully, almost apologetically. I missed my last visit because of work. Karen did not even look at the card. Not my problem. The words seemed to echo through the bus. Across the aisle, 17-year-old Emma Lewis stared at Monica. Something about the woman reminded her of her own mother. The tired eyes, the worried expression, the way she kept apologizing even when she had done nothing wrong. Emma felt a knot forming in her stomach. Outside, the storm intensified. Wind pushed snow across the street in thick, white waves. Visibility dropped lower with every block. David glanced at the road ahead, then back into the mirror. Monica sat completely still, alone, embarrassed, surrounded by people, yet somehow isolated from all of them. Karen stepped forward again. Driver, are you going to handle this or not? David looked at Monica. Then he looked at the passengers. Then he slowly glanced toward the storm raging outside. And for the first time since the argument began, something changed in his expression. Karen waited with her arms folded, confident that the entire bus would eventually agree with her. The silence stretched for several long seconds. Snow rattled against the windows. The heater groaned overhead. Every passenger seemed to be holding their breath. David finally spoke. Ma'am, she paid her fare just like everyone else. Karen shook her head immediately. That is not the point. Then what is the point? David asked calmly. Karen opened her mouth, but for a moment no answer came. Several passengers shifted in their seats. The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected. Monica remained silent near the window. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders slumped beneath her coat. Her eyes stayed fixed on the storm outside. It was clear she wanted the argument to end. She wanted to disappear. Karen recovered quickly. The point is that everyone on this bus has responsibilities. We all have places to be. If something happens, we are all stuck. A few passengers nodded. Others looked uncertain. Emma studied Monica carefully. The young woman noticed something nobody else seemed to see. Monica's hands were trembling. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest she was colder than she wanted anyone to know. Emma glanced toward the front of the bus. She does not look dangerous, she said quietly. Karen turned around. Nobody asked you. The teenager immediately looked down. David saw the exchange in his mirror. He also noticed something else. Monica had not defended herself once. Not a single time. Most people would have argued. Most people would have gotten angry. Monica simply sat there absorbing every comment like she believed she deserved it. That bothered him more than Karen's complaints. The bus rolled through another intersection. Visibility continued to worsen. Streetlights glowed through the snow like blurry orange circles. Monica slowly reached into her purse and removed her phone. The screen lit up briefly. A photograph appeared. Before she locked it again, David only caught a glimpse through the mirror. A smiling young man stood beside Monica in the picture. The image disappeared almost immediately. Monica lowered her head. Her thumb rested on the edge of the phone as though she wanted to call someone, but could not. Emma noticed tears forming in the corners of her eyes. Not dramatic tears, just quiet sadness. The kind people tried very hard to hide. Across the aisle, an older woman finally spoke. Honey, are you okay? Monica forced a small smile. I am fine. The answer sounded automatic, like she had repeated it 100 times before. The older woman looked unconvinced. Do you have family meeting you at the hospital? Monica hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Not anymore. The bus fell silent again. Even Karen stopped talking. The words were simple, but they carried a weight nobody expected. Monica stared out the window. Snow raced across the glass in endless white streaks. For a moment, she looked completely alone. David felt something sink in his chest. 22 years behind the wheel had shown him thousands of passengers. Students, workers, veterans, parents, people carrying burdens nobody else could see. And suddenly, he had the feeling Monica Brooks was carrying far more than anyone on that bus realized. Then his radio crackled to life. The dispatcher sounded urgent. Attention, all drivers. Severe weather advisory. Conditions are deteriorating rapidly across the city. David listened carefully. The message continued. What he heard next made him glance immediately toward the storm outside. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker with unusual urgency. Attention, all drivers. Effective immediately, several routes are being suspended due to whiteout conditions. Visibility has dropped below 100 feet in multiple areas. Proceed with caution. A wave of murmurs moved through the bus. Passengers immediately checked their phones. Some looked out the windows and seemed surprised by how much worse the storm had become. David glanced toward the intersection ahead. The traffic lights were barely visible through the swirling snow. What had started as a difficult winter evening was quickly becoming something far more serious. Great, Karen muttered loudly. Exactly what we needed. Monica sat quietly near the window. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and stared at the snow-covered streets passing by. Her reflection appeared faintly in the glass. Tired eyes, pale cheeks, worry she could no longer hide. The bus continued forward for another block before suddenly slowing. David eased his foot onto the brake pedal. A line of vehicles sat motionless ahead. Their red taillights glowed through the storm like distant embers. What now? One passenger asked. David leaned slightly forward. Looks like traffic is backed up. The line of vehicles barely moved. Snow continued piling onto roofs, sidewalks, and parked cars. Emma looked outside and noticed a city worker struggling to clear part of a crosswalk. The wind nearly pushed him sideways. She had lived in Buffalo her entire life and knew what storms like this could do. People got stranded. Roads closed. Situations changed fast. Behind her, Karen sighed dramatically. This is ridiculous. Nobody responded. More passengers seemed interested in watching the weather than listening to her complaints now. David checked the route monitor mounted beside his seat. Mercy Hospital was only a few miles away, but under these conditions, a few miles could feel like 50. He looked back through the mirror. Monica had lowered her head. Her eyes were closed. For a second, he wondered if she had fallen asleep. Then he noticed her lips moving silently. Maybe she was praying. Maybe she was simply trying to stay calm. Either way, she looked completely alone. The older woman who had spoken to Monica earlier leaned across the aisle. Honey, are you sure you are okay? Monica opened her eyes and offered another small smile. I will be okay. The answer sounded weaker than before. The older woman frowned. She clearly did not believe it. Neither did Emma. Another blast of wind struck the side of the bus. Several passengers turned toward the windows. Snow swirled so thickly outside that entire buildings disappeared behind white curtains. The city suddenly felt smaller, isolated, trapped. Then a sharp electronic alert sounded from Monica's phone. She looked down immediately. Her expression changed. Not panic, not fear. Something heavier, something sadder. She stared at the screen for several long seconds before slowly locking it again. Emma noticed. David noticed too. Karen did not. She was busy complaining to another passenger about delays and weather reports and missed dinner reservations. Monica slipped the phone back into her purse and placed both hands gently over her stomach. Her eyes drifted toward the storm outside once more. Nobody on that bus knew what message had just appeared on her screen. Nobody knew why her eyes suddenly looked wetter than before. And nobody realized that within the next few minutes, everything was about to change. Emma could not stop thinking about the look on Monica's face after reading that message. It was not the expression of someone annoyed by a delay. It was the expression of someone carrying bad news alone. The bus barely moved another 20 feet before stopping again. Snow continued falling in thick waves, coating every parked car and burying the edges of the road. David listened as more updates came through the radio. Road closures, accidents, emergency crews stretched thin across the city. None of it sounded good. Behind him, the passengers grew increasingly restless. Some checked weather apps. Others called family members. A businessman near the rear muttered that he might have to spend the night downtown if conditions got any worse. Karen immediately joined the conversation. This entire city shuts down every time it snows. Nobody laughed. Nobody seemed interested in her complaints anymore. Their attention kept drifting back toward Monica. The older woman across the aisle finally leaned closer. Honey, what did that message say? Monica hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her purse. For a moment, it looked like she might refuse to answer. Then she took a slow breath. It was from the hospital. Several nearby passengers looked up. Even Karen stopped talking. Monica stared down at her hands. My doctor had to leave because of the storm. The older woman frowned. What does that mean? Monica swallowed hard. It means my appointment is canceled. Silence spread through the bus. Emma felt her stomach sink. After everything Monica had already been through, the one place she was trying to reach could no longer help her tonight. Can they reschedule? Someone asked. Monica gave a small nod. Eventually. Her voice cracked slightly. But they wanted to see me today. David's eyes lifted to the mirror. He noticed the way Monica carefully avoided looking at anyone. He had seen that behavior before. People only did that when they were trying very hard not to cry. The older woman spoke softly. Is something wrong with the pregnancy? Monica looked toward the snow-covered window. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she answered in a voice barely above a whisper. The doctors have been monitoring some complications. The words immediately changed the mood inside the bus. Suddenly, this was not about delays. It was not about schedules. It was not about inconvenience. Monica was a frightened mother facing uncertainty during one of the worst storms of the year. Emma looked around and noticed other passengers beginning to realize the same thing. Expressions softened. Eyes lowered. Even some of the people who had stayed silent during Karen's complaints now looked uncomfortable. Karen shifted in her seat. For the first time all evening, she seemed unsure of herself. Monica reached into her purse again and pulled out the same folded appointment card. She stared at it for a moment before placing it back. The movement looked small, but somehow heartbreaking. David felt a heaviness settle over the bus. Outside, the storm continued to roar. Inside, nobody seemed interested in arguing anymore. Then the bus suddenly rocked as a powerful gust of wind slammed against its side, and a warning light flashed briefly on David's dashboard. He looked down at the instrument panel, then out at the snow-covered road ahead. What he saw made his expression change immediately. David stared through the windshield as the warning light blinked once more before disappearing. The road ahead had nearly vanished beneath drifting snow. A city plow sat sideways at the next intersection, its flashing lights barely visible through the storm. Traffic was no longer moving. It was simply waiting. The dispatcher returned over the radio. All operators be advised. Multiple routes are now experiencing temporary stoppages. Remain in safe locations until conditions improve. A groan spread through the bus. Several passengers immediately began complaining. One man checked his watch for the 10th time in 5 minutes. Another called his wife and explained that he had no idea when he would get home. Karen threw her hands into the air. Unbelievable. We are stranded because of weather, and now everybody has to sit here all night. David ignored her. His attention remained fixed on the mirror. Monica had become noticeably quieter. She sat with one hand resting against the window and the other over her stomach. Her breathing seemed slower than before, more deliberate. Emma noticed it too. Something felt different. The teenager stood from her seat and cautiously walked a few rows closer. Ma'am, she asked softly. Monica looked up. Yes. Do you need anything? Water? A snack? Monica managed a small smile. It was the first genuine smile anyone had seen from her all evening. That is very kind of you. Emma reached into her backpack and pulled out a granola bar. Here. Monica hesitated. I cannot take your food. Please. Emma gently placed it in her hand. My mom always says people should help each other during storms. Monica stared at the wrapper for a second before whispering, Thank you. The simple exchange changed something inside the bus. The older woman across the aisle offered a bottle of water. A man near the rear dug through his briefcase and found a packet of crackers. Another passenger offered tissues. Small gestures. Ordinary gestures. But after hours of tension, they felt important. Karen watched the scene unfold with visible discomfort. The mood was shifting away from her. The attention she had controlled earlier was disappearing. Monica carefully opened the granola bar and took a small bite. For the first time all evening, she looked slightly less alone. David noticed. So did everyone else. Then Monica's phone rang. The sound immediately drew every eye toward her. She looked at the screen and froze. Her face lost what little color remained. Slowly, she answered. Hello. Nobody could hear the person on the other end. They only heard Monica's responses. Yes, this is Monica. A pause. I understand. Another pause. Her eyes filled with tears. "No, I am by myself." The entire bus went silent. Even Karen stopped moving. Monica listened for several more seconds. Then she whispered, "Thank you for calling." The line disconnected. She lowered the phone into her lap and stared at it. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to. Finally, the older woman asked the question everyone was thinking. "Honey, what happened?" Monica swallowed hard. Her voice barely carried across the aisle. "The specialist reviewed my latest test results." Her eyes drifted toward the storm outside. "They said I should not be alone tonight." The words landed heavily inside the bus. And when David saw the fear in her face, he made a decision that would change everything. David did not make the decision slowly. The moment he saw the fear in Monica's eyes, something inside him settled. He reached for the radio microphone hanging beside his seat. "Dispatch, this is Bus 214. Static crackled back immediately. "Go ahead, 214. David glanced through the windshield at the wall of snow ahead. "I have a passenger with a medical concern. Pregnant. Traveling alone. Hospital appointment canceled due to weather. I need guidance." The dispatcher paused. "Stand by." The bus fell silent once again. Every passenger seemed to be listening. Monica lowered her eyes. She looked embarrassed that the conversation was about her. David could tell she hated being the center of attention. After nearly 30 seconds, the dispatcher returned. 214. Emergency services are currently experiencing major delays across the city. Estimated response times are significantly extended due to weather conditions. Several passengers exchanged worried looks. David frowned. "How extended?" Another pause. "Possibly over an hour, depending on road access." The answer hit the bus like a cold wave. Monica closed her eyes briefly. Emma looked toward her with growing concern. The older woman across the aisle shook her head in disbelief. An hour in conditions like these felt impossible. Karen shifted uncomfortably in her seat. For the first time all evening, she said nothing. David slowly returned the microphone to its hook. Then he stood up. The movement immediately drew everyone's attention. 22 years driving city buses had given him a calm presence that passengers trusted. When David Carter stood, people listened. He turned toward the rows of seats behind him. "Folks," he said quietly, "I need everyone to stay calm." Nobody interrupted. Nobody complained. Even Karen remained silent. David looked directly at Monica. "Ma'am, do you have anyone who can come get you?" Monica swallowed hard. "No family." She shook her head. "My mother passed away 3 years ago. Friends. Most of them are outside the city." Her voice grew softer. "The baby's father left when he found out I was pregnant." A painful silence followed. Nobody knew what to say. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes. The older woman reached across the aisle and gently squeezed Monica's hand. Monica tried to smile, but it quickly disappeared. David nodded slowly. He understood more than he said. He walked back to his seat and carefully removed his heavy winter jacket from the hook behind him. The motion seemed ordinary at first. Then passengers began exchanging confused looks. Karen frowned. "What are you doing?" David ignored the question. He folded the jacket neatly over one arm. It was an old navy blue coat, worn from years of Buffalo winters. The kind of coat built for snowstorms. The kind of coat someone depended on. Emma watched him closely. Something important was happening. She could feel it. David looked through the windshield one last time at the blizzard raging outside. Then he reached for the bus controls. A loud hiss filled the cabin as the doors slowly opened. Instantly, freezing wind rushed inside. Snow swirled through the entrance. Several passengers gasped. Monica looked up in confusion. Karen's eyes widened. And then David Carter stepped toward the open doorway carrying his jacket, while every person on that bus stared in complete disbelief. Freezing. Wind rushed through the open doors and swept across the bus. Several passengers pulled their coats tighter. Snowflakes danced through the entrance before melting against the rubber floor. David stepped down carefully onto the icy pavement and disappeared briefly into the white haze outside. Nobody understood what he was doing. Monica stared toward the open doorway, confused. Karen looked equally stunned. "Has he lost his mind?" she whispered. No one answered. Every eye remained fixed on the entrance. A few seconds later, David returned. Snow covered his shoulders and gray hair. His face was red from the cold. Without saying a word, he walked directly down the aisle toward Monica. The bus remained completely silent. Monica looked up as he stopped beside her seat. Then David gently held out his heavy winter jacket. Here, he said. Monica blinked in surprise. What? Take it. She immediately shook her head. No, I cannot do that. Yes, you can. His voice was calm but firm. You need it more than I do. Monica looked at the coat, then back at David. Her eyes widened. But what about you? David smiled faintly. I have spent 22 winters driving buses in Buffalo. A few passengers chuckled softly. Trust me, I know how to handle the cold. Monica's eyes filled with tears almost instantly. She opened her mouth to protest again, but could not find the words. David carefully draped the jacket across her shoulders anyway. The coat looked oversized on her. Warm. Protective. For the first time all evening, Monica looked like someone was finally taking care of her instead of judging her. The older woman across the aisle wiped her eyes. Emma felt her throat tighten. Even some of the passengers who had barely spoken all evening looked away to hide their emotions. Something had changed inside the bus. It was no longer a collection of strangers waiting out a storm. It felt different now. More human. More connected. David crouched slightly beside Monica's seat. Listen to me, he said quietly. You are not alone tonight. Monica's lips trembled. She nodded but could not speak. David stood and returned to the front of the bus. Karen watched him the entire time. Her expression had completely changed. The confidence she carried earlier was gone. In its place was something closer to shame. She looked toward Monica, then quickly looked away. Outside, the storm continued to rage. Snow hammered against the windows. Wind shook the bus. Yet inside, the atmosphere felt warmer than it had all evening. Then something unexpected happened. A man near the rear stood up and removed an extra blanket from his backpack. My daughter keeps this in my car for emergencies, he said. She would want her to have it. Another passenger offered a travel pillow. Someone else handed over hand warmers. Emma removed her scarf and placed it gently beside Monica. One act of kindness became another, then another, then another. David watched through the mirror as complete strangers began helping a woman they had never met before. And for the first time since the storm began, he allowed himself a small smile. But that smile disappeared seconds later when Monica suddenly pressed a hand against her stomach and quietly inhaled through clenched teeth. The change was subtle at first. Monica lowered her head and took a slow breath, keeping one hand pressed gently against her stomach. Most passengers might not have noticed, but Emma did. The teenager immediately leaned forward. Are you okay? Monica forced a smile. I think so. The answer sounded uncertain. David turned in his seat. Years of experience had taught him how to recognize when someone was trying not to worry others. Monica looked exactly like that. Ma'am, he called softly. Do you need me to contact emergency services again? Monica hesitated. I do not know. Her voice trembled slightly. Everything has been stressful today. The older woman beside her reached over and squeezed her arm. You do not have to be brave for everybody. Those words seemed to break something loose inside Monica. Tears filled her eyes again. I am sorry. For what? Emma asked. Monica looked around the bus. At the blanket, the scarf, the bottle of water, the coat around her shoulders. For causing trouble. The reaction was immediate. You are not causing trouble, the older woman said firmly. A businessman near the rear nodded. Not even close. Another passenger added. We are exactly where we need to be. Monica looked stunned, as though she had expected judgment and found kindness instead. Karen sat quietly near the front. Earlier, she had been the loudest voice on the bus. Now she could barely look at Monica. Every act of kindness felt like a mirror reflecting her own behavior back at her. Outside, the storm continued to howl. Snow piled higher along the curb. Wind rattled the windows hard enough to make them vibrate. The city seemed frozen in place. Then David's radio crackled again. Bus 214, respond. David immediately grabbed the microphone. Go ahead. Road crews report major closures ahead. You may be stationary for an extended period. A wave of concern moved through the passengers. David frowned. Any update on emergency response times? Static filled the speaker. Then the dispatcher answered. Still delayed. Resources remained stretched citywide. David thanked them and set the microphone down. The news was not good. Monica looked toward the windshield. I do not want everyone trapped here because of me. Stop saying that. Emma replied before anyone else could. The words surprised even her. This storm is not your fault. Several passengers nodded in agreement. Monica lowered her eyes. For the first time all evening, she seemed to believe them. Then Karen slowly stood from her seat. The movement drew attention immediately. She walked down the aisle, stopping beside Monica. The entire bus watched. Nobody knew what she was about to say. Karen looked uncomfortable, more uncomfortable than anyone had seen her all night. Finally, she spoke. "I owe you an apology." Monica blinked in surprise. Karen swallowed hard. "I was wrong." The bus fell completely silent. Karen looked at the floor before continuing. "I was thinking about myself. I did not stop to think about what you were going through." Tears formed in her eyes. "I am sorry." Monica stared at her for several long seconds. And before she could answer, a sudden sharp pain crossed her face, causing every person on the bus to immediately realize something had changed. Monica gripped the edge of her seat and closed her eyes. The expression on her face erased every remaining trace of conversation inside the bus. Karen's apology was forgotten instantly. The storm outside was forgotten. Every passenger focused on one thing. Monica slowly inhaled and then exhaled. The older woman beside her leaned forward. "Honey, talk to us. What is happening?" Monica opened her eyes. Fear was written across her face. "I do not know." Her voice shook. "Everything has felt different tonight." David was already out of his seat. He moved down the aisle and knelt beside her. "Are you having trouble breathing?" Monica shook her head. "No, dizziness." "A little." Emma immediately grabbed the bottle of water someone had given her earlier. Monica accepted it with trembling hands. The bus had become completely quiet. Nobody checked their phones anymore. Nobody complained about delays. Even Karen remained standing nearby, her eyes fixed on Monica with growing concern. David carefully reached for the radio microphone again. "Dispatch, this is Bus 214. The response came quickly. "Go ahead. I need another update on emergency assistance." The dispatcher paused. "We are still experiencing delays. Crews are responding as quickly as possible." David looked toward the windshield. Snow continued to slam against the glass. Conditions showed no signs of improving. "Understood." He set the microphone down. Monica lowered her head again. "I am sorry," she whispered. David immediately shook his head. "You have nothing to apologize for." The older woman nodded firmly. "Not one thing." Several passengers quietly agreed. Monica looked around the bus as if she could not quite believe what she was hearing. Earlier that evening, she had felt invisible, unwanted, alone. Now complete strangers were watching over her. The contrast overwhelmed her. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I have been trying so hard," she admitted softly. "Since the beginning." Nobody interrupted. "I kept telling myself I could handle everything alone." Her eyes drifted toward the snowy window. The appointments, the bills, the fear. Emma felt tears filling her own eyes. Monica continued. "Every day I wake up wondering if I am strong enough to be a mother." The bus remained silent. Those words seemed to reach everyone. The businessman near the rear lowered his head. The older woman squeezed Monica's hand. Even Karen wiped at her eyes. David listened carefully. Then he smiled. "Can I tell you something?" Monica looked at him. "Sure." David glanced toward the storm outside before speaking. "The strongest people I have ever met were never the ones who thought they had all the answers." Monica listened quietly. The strongest people were the ones who kept moving forward even when they were scared. Tears filled Monica's eyes again. For the first time that evening, a small genuine smile appeared. Then a bright flash of light suddenly cut through the snow outside. Several passengers turned toward the windshield. David stood and stepped toward the front. Through the white storm, distant emergency lights had finally become visible, and every person on the bus realized help might be closer than anyone had dared hope. The flashing lights grew brighter with each passing second. Blue and red reflections danced across the snow-covered streets and flickered through the bus windows. A wave of relief moved through the passengers. Someone quietly whispered, "Thank God." Monica looked toward the windshield, hope appearing in her eyes for the first time all evening. David stepped closer to the front doors and squinted through the storm. The vehicle approaching was moving slowly, fighting its way through deep snow and poor visibility. Every person on the bus watched in silence. Then the radio crackled again. "Bus 214, be advised, emergency crews are attempting to reach your location, but road conditions remain difficult." David acknowledged the message and looked back toward Monica. "Help is coming." Monica nodded. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Not tears of fear, tears of relief. Emma smiled. The older woman squeezed Monica's hand. Even Karen looked grateful. For a brief moment, it seemed like the nightmare was finally ending. Then Monica suddenly inhaled sharply. The sound immediately drew everyone's attention. She closed her eyes and gripped the armrest. David turned around instantly. Monica! She opened her eyes and forced a smile. I am okay. But nobody believed her. The older woman shook her head. Honey, you do not look okay. Monica took another slow breath. I just need a minute. The bus became silent again. Snow continued pounding the windows. The flashing lights outside remained visible, but the emergency vehicle was still struggling to reach them. Progress was painfully slow. David glanced between the approaching lights and Monica. His concern grew with every passing second. Emma moved closer. Do you want me to call someone for you? Monica looked down at her phone. The lock screen still displayed the photograph of the smiling young man. She stared at it for a moment before shaking her head. There is nobody left to call. Those words settled heavily over the entire bus. Karen lowered her eyes. The businessman near the rear looked away. Nobody knew what to say. Monica swallowed hard. My mother is gone. My father passed away when I was in college. Most of my family moved away years ago. She looked down at her hands. I thought I could do this by myself. The older woman gently squeezed her shoulder. Nobody should have to do everything alone. Monica nodded silently. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Outside, the emergency lights finally reached the intersection ahead, but then unexpectedly stopped. The vehicle could not move forward. Snowdrifts blocked part of the road. Passengers immediately noticed. Relief vanished. Concern returned. David felt his stomach tighten. The storm was still winning. The dispatcher came over the radio once more. Bus 214. Crews are nearby, but may require additional time to reach your exact position. Several passengers exchanged worried glances. Monica closed her eyes again. Her hand rested protectively over her stomach. The bus felt smaller somehow. More isolated. More vulnerable. Yet despite the fear, nobody looked away from her anymore. Nobody saw a stranger now. They saw someone who mattered. Someone they wanted to help. And as David looked through the mirror at every face on that bus, he realized something remarkable had happened during the storm. A group of strangers had become a family. But he also knew the hardest part of the night might still be ahead. The storm continued raging outside, but inside the bus something remarkable happened. Nobody complained anymore. Nobody talked about schedules or delays. Every person on board seemed focused on one thing: getting Monica through the night safely. David remained near the front, watching both the road and the passengers. Through the swirling snow, he could see emergency workers attempting to clear a path toward them. Progress was slow, but it was happening. For the first time in hours, hope felt real. Monica sat wrapped in the coat, blanket, and scarf that strangers had given her. She looked exhausted, but she no longer looked alone. Emma sat beside her now. The older woman remained across the aisle. Even the businessman from the back had moved closer. It was as if an invisible wall separating strangers had disappeared. Then Karen took a deep breath and stepped forward again. This time nobody expected criticism. Karen looked directly at Monica. Tears filled her eyes. I need to tell you something. Monica looked up quietly. Karen swallowed hard. My daughter was 24 when she had her first baby. The bus became silent. I remember how scared she was. Karen wiped her eyes. And tonight, I forgot that. I forgot what fear looks like. Her voice cracked. I saw inconvenience instead of a human being. Nobody interrupted. Karen turned toward the rest of the passengers. Every one of you showed more compassion tonight than I did. The confession hung heavily in the air. Monica stared at her for several seconds before offering a small smile. Thank you. Karen nodded, unable to say anything else. The moment felt genuine. Honest. A burden seemed to lift from her shoulders. David watched through the mirror. Sometimes people changed because they were embarrassed. Sometimes they changed because they were forced to. But sometimes they changed because they finally saw someone else's pain. Outside, the flashing emergency lights moved closer. Snowplows had finally opened enough space for vehicles to pass. A cheer broke out near the rear of the bus. Several passengers stood to get a better look. Emma smiled. They are coming. Monica followed the lights through the window. Tears filled her eyes again. This time they were tears of relief. The older woman squeezed her hand. See? We told you that you were not alone. Monica nodded. You were right. David picked up the radio once more. The dispatcher confirmed what everyone hoped to hear. Emergency personnel were only minutes away now. The bus erupted in quiet applause. Not because the storm was over, not because the roads were clear, but because they had made it through the hardest part together. Monica looked around the bus at the faces surrounding her. Just hours earlier they had been strangers. Now they felt like friends she would never forget. Then she looked toward David. The driver smiled warmly from the front of the bus. Monica felt fresh tears forming. She realized that if he had not chosen kindness when everyone else chose convenience, this night could have been very different. And as the emergency lights finally pulled alongside the bus, every passenger understood they had witnessed something far more important than a winter storm. 6 months later, the snow was gone. Bright summer sunlight filled the streets of Buffalo, and the city looked nothing like the frozen landscape that had trapped a bus full of strangers one winter night. David Carter pulled his bus into the downtown transit station and completed another ordinary shift. To everyone else, it was just another day. To David, it was Tuesday. He gathered his paperwork, checked the seats one final time, and prepared to head home. Then he heard someone call his name. Mr. Carter? David turned around. For a second, he did not recognize the young woman standing near the curb. Then she smiled. Instantly, he remembered. Monica. His face lit up. Monica Brooks looked completely different. The exhaustion was gone. The fear was gone. She looked healthy, confident, and happy. Standing beside her was Emma Lewis, now laughing as she waved. Behind them stood the older woman from the bus, the businessman, and even Karen Mitchell. David stared in disbelief. What is this? Monica laughed softly. A surprise. Then she carefully lifted a baby carrier from a nearby bench. David's eyes widened. Inside was a smiling baby boy wrapped in a blue blanket. The child looked up curiously at the strangers gathered around him. Monica gently placed the carrier in front of David. I would like you to meet someone. David's eyes softened immediately. Hello there, little guy. The baby reached upward with tiny hands, making everyone laugh. Monica smiled through tears. His name is David. The bus driver froze. For several seconds he could not speak. You named him David? Monica nodded. After the man who reminded me that kindness still exists. David lowered his head and wiped his eyes. The group stood quietly, allowing him a moment. Even Karen was crying openly now. Monica reached into her purse and removed a small envelope. There is one more thing. David accepted it and slowly opened it. Inside was a photograph taken shortly after the baby was born. Written across the bottom was a message in neat handwriting. The man who stopped long enough to care changed our lives forever. David stared at the photograph. For 22 years, he had driven buses through rain, snow, traffic, and endless routines. He had never thought of himself as special. He had simply done what felt right. Monica looked around at the people gathered there. That night taught me something, she said. The storm was not the hardest part. Feeling alone was. The group nodded. They all understood. But because of all of you, Monica continued, my son will grow up knowing that strangers can become family. Silence settled over the station. Warm, peaceful, meaningful. David looked down at the smiling baby and then at the people standing around him. People who had entered a bus as strangers and left connected by one extraordinary night. Sometimes the greatest thing a person can offer is not money, power, or status. Sometimes it is simply choosing kindness when kindness is needed most. And on a freezing winter night, one bus driver made that choice. The people who witnessed it never forgot. Neither did the little boy named David.